Sundays are a high point for me. I just absolutely love coming together weekly as a church body all together. And so we constantly tell you that if you only experience Beloved Church on Sundays, you're missing out. Because the church is not just the corporate gathering, it's us living on mission, following Jesus together. And so we want to be together throughout the week. But there is something special about all of us coming together once a week. And so I so love that. But I have to tell you that last Sunday, after I left, things kind of went south for us because we made it until sometime in the middle of the night. My wife and I are in bed, kids are long asleep, and you know what happens when you're tired and it's the middle of the night because it's the only time this happens when you hear chirp. Like, oh, smoke alarm. And the insurance company mocks you by sending you free batteries every year that you really paid a lot of money for. And so it starts chirping, and there's only two in our house. So we're trying to figure out because you can't really, I'm deaf in one ear, and so it's really hard for me to locate sounds. And so we're trying to figure out, is it that one? Is it this one? And so I get a ladder by the one that we're pretty sure it is, and I get up there, and then to make things worse, I read the little writing on it, and it says, test weekly. Weekly? Are you kidding me? What kind of a monster tests their smoke alarm weekly to make that god-awful noise? So we replaced the batteries, and of course, it's just infuriating. How dare that smoke alarm make sure that it's ready to save my life? But what's crazy ironic about it is the very next day, I kid you not, my wife and I have the kids, we're outside playing, and my wife has a candle going inside the kitchen, and so we walk inside, and I go I can just kind of walk through, and all of a sudden I hear my wife screaming, Kevin! 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 And I'm like, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. And I turn around and look, and Leland, my son, who's 5 years old, he has just decided to take a piece of paper that he found and set it on fire with a candle. And so he's just standing there. And so I'm like, it's not me. That's not me. And so she grabs the paper from him and throws it in the sink and stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm glad the smoke alarms are working at least. That's good. Didn't set them off, but so then I'm wondering, what was that? What possessed him to think that it was okay to just take a piece of paper and set it on fire in the middle of our kitchen? And he has become a little more infatuated, shall we say, with fire recently. One, I'll blame it on my father, because Grandpa had a bonfire recently where Leland loved it and got to throw all this cardboard in there and stuff. And so he's like, oh, fire. And then I probably added fuel to that, and we have this tree stump, so last major hurricane, there's a pine tree, so we no longer have a pine tree, but there was a stump, and it was hard as a rock and everything, so over the last couple of years, I've just that's been my stress reliever. I'll go out there with an axe and pretend to be a real man and just hack at it. And so we had decided, I'd been telling him, maybe we'll just burn it out one day. We'll let it dry out and everything. And so it had rained, and so I was telling him, I was it's not going to work. We got to try. So we went out there, and it would burn a little tiny flame and then flicker out and stuff. And so pine tree stump is still in my yard. And my son loves fire, which is not good for any of us. If you're concerned right now, we have security. They're taking care of it. But here's the thing. Pine trees remind me of when I was a teacher. I used to be a high school teacher, and I remember there was this kid who was just he was a handful. This kid was all over the place, would not listen, and one of my coworkers, another teacher across the hall one day, she was like, oh, I've seen his family tree. It's a pine tree. And it took me a second. I was like, what? It's oh, pine tree grows straight up. And so it was it's really insensitive, mean way of saying just not the brightest tree. It doesn't branch out. It just kind of grows. And so that's always stuck with me, that family trees, you don't want to be a pine tree because that's not good. And so have you ever thought about the shape of your family tree? What would your family tree look like if you're actually visualized? What does this look like? What would you actually give to your family tree? What kind of shape would you give? Would there be just a bend in the tree? Would you twist it in some kind of gnarly, weird growth? Would you stunt the growth of your family tree? All these things that you have to wonder, okay, if I'm just a descendant of a legacy, like it or not, I'm born into this family. And so what am I doing with this trajectory of our family? Where is this family actually headed? And what will it look like? And maybe you're looking back and you're like, there's something that I've already done that has marked my life. It's marked my family tree. Like it has created this thing and I don't know, there's no changing it. It is what it is. And you feel this weight of guilt and shame, whatever, I don't know. Like maybe you're like, no, I'm a bright spot on that family tree. Like so much growth. And like we fanned out or we shot up in the sky. You may be coming with all kinds of ideas of what you have contributed to your family tree. And you may be looking back at a part of your family tree that you had zero control over. You're like, well, that twist in the tree right there, that shapes so much of who I am. And I despise it. And I wish it wasn't so. And I try to hide that from people. I want to pretend like that part of the family tree does not exist. But we all have family trees. In fact, we're going to look at Jesus' family tree today, as we start a new series looking in the gospel according to Matthew, and we're calling this Finding the Kingdom. And so just for you type A personalities, like you want to think metacognitively here, like the big picture, we are approaching year 2 as a church. And so year 1 was simply this: be my witnesses. And then you unpack that. Well, what does that mean to be his witnesses? Jesus says, go be my witness. This is what you exist for, church, is to make much of my name. To live for the glory of God, and his glory is revealed like nothing else in his gospel. And so you were witness to his gospel, his good news that God the Father sent God the Son to save us by dying in our place on a cross, to offer forgiveness to all who would believe and confess him to be Lord, following him as their king. And you rejoice in that, you hold that gospel central, and you proclaim that gospel as his witness. You testify about that we know this good news, and good news must spread, so we share it. And so we'll be a gospel witness and a gospel presence, all of it trying to point to this good news, this gospel. And what is the gospel? In short, it's that the kingdom has come. That Jesus came and has inaugurated his kingdom. He has brought the kingdom, and he's saying, follow me in this kingdom. And so year 2, this is where we're going. Year 1, we get it. We are to be his witnesses. We're to tell people the gospel, the good news that the kingdom has come. And now, for year 2, let's look at what does it actually mean to live in his kingdom? If we're going to live for it, like hold it, be gospel-centered people, always remembering that it is God who defines me and what he has done for me. It's grace, that he loves me when I don't deserve it. I am his beloved. And now, what is he calling me into? How should I live? If I'm to follow my king, what is the king saying I should be about, other than just proclaiming this? But how do I live in it? And so this is what we are doing as we're going to walk through Matthew, and we're starting here because it's Christmas, and there's this beautiful birth narrative. This is the time where we celebrate the birth of Christ, his coming, the incarnation of the Son of God. And so here we go, starting off with Matthew. And so if you want to turn with me, we're in Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 1. So Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. And understand, there are 4 gospels. If you're not super familiar with the scriptures, there are 4 gospels that typically, in the order that we have the scriptures, we see them as the first 4 books of the New Testament. And they're all 4 telling the same gospel, but from different angles, and they're emphasizing different things. And so sometimes it can feel like they're contradicting each other, but let's talk through that as you encounter those things, because they're not. They're actually beautifully in sync and trying to show us something. So let's walk through. So know that this is going to be a story of who Jesus is and what he has done and what he has taught us. That is essentially what one of the 4 gospel books is going to do. So Matthew starts, and he writes this, verse 1, an account of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And so if you know anything about history, you've heard of these people: David, Abraham, Jesus, and you might immediately be thinking like, son of David, son of Abraham, you missed a few years there. Like, somebody's not very good at math. Like, no, he's saying like, here's a highlight reel. You want to know where Jesus comes from, his family tree? Jesus is a son of David. And Jesus is a son of Abraham. He is in this lineage. And so 2 huge markers in his family tree. David. David was one of the first kings of Israel. In fact, he's the second one, right after Saul. And so David is called a man after God's own heart. And David receives this promise that his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom. That the descendants, they will sit on his throne forever. And so Jesus is in the lineage of a family who is given a promise for an eternal kingdom, that the king would be from this family and he would reign forever. Okay, that's a pretty cool thing to have in your family tree. And then son of Abraham. Abraham, when he was called Abram, was called out of modern-day Iraq. And God showed up and said, hey, I'm bringing you to a new place. I'm going to make a new nation out of you. And in fact, from your descendants, from your seed, which actually becomes singular, which is a reference to Jesus, but he's saying, I'm going to bless all the nations. So you just imagine that. In your family tree, son of David, you will have a king on the throne forever. And son of Abraham, you will be a blessing to the entire world. And so that's what Matthew is doing. Like, here, quick snapshot. Jesus is a son of David, a king forever. Jesus is the son of Abraham, a blessing to all nations. And now he's going to get a little more specific. So verse 2. Well, actually, before we jump into that, I want to help just kind of us clarify, like, why is he doing this? Why is it important for him to give a family tree or a genealogy for Jesus? It's because this is the Christ. And so as he says, an account of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, Christ is a title. That's not his last name. Like Jesus wasn't known as Jesus Christ, as in Kevin Franklin kind of idea. Christ was his title. And Christ means anointed one from Greek. It means anointed one. It's equivalent to this Hebrew word for Messiah, and it implies kingship. This is an anointed king. And so now he's giving this genealogy because in the ancient Near East, in the culture in which this was written, in the culture in which Jesus walked on this planet, to give a genealogy was like handing someone your resume. Like you didn't hand somebody a list of your top accomplishments and all of that. You would tell them like who you are descended from. There wasn't as much upward mobility as we like to call it and so forth. Like you weren't like a self-made man. You were largely born into the status in which you would remain. And so to give a genealogy is to say, here's the resume of Jesus Christ. Christ, the anointed one. Here's his resume. So let's go. Verse 2. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac fathered Jacob. Jacob fathered Judah and his brothers. Judah fathered Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Aram. Aram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz by Rahab. Boaz fathered Obed by Ruth. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered King David. David fathered Solomon by Uriah's wife. Solomon fathered Rehoboam. Rehoboam fathered Abijah. Abijah fathered Asa. Asa fathered Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat fathered Joram. Joram fathered Uzziah. Uzziah fathered Jotham. Jotham fathered Ahaz. Ahaz fathered Hezekiah. Hezekiah fathered Manasseh. Manasseh fathered Ammon. Ammon fathered Josiah. And Josiah fathered Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah fathered Shealtiel. Shealtiel fathered Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel fathered Abiud. Abiud fathered Eliakim. Eliakim fathered Azar. Azar fathered Zadok. Zadok fathered Achim. Achim fathered Eliud. Eliud fathered Eleazar. Eleazar fathered Mathan. Mathan fathered Jacob. And Jacob fathered Joseph, the husband of Mary, who gave birth to Jesus, who is called the Christ. Are any of you impressed with my ability to read Hebrew names? Thank you. And just so you know, I have a master's degree in theology, just so I can tell you, as long as you sound confident, no one knows the difference. I'm sure that I did not pronounce half of this correctly. But there you go. But isn't that a beautiful family tree? Like, as a resume, as something given, like, isn't that impressive? Like, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Christ, the anointed king. Someone who would bless all the nations, the king who will reign forevermore. Like, how impressive is that? Look at all of his ancestors. Like, this is beautiful, right? This is impressive, right? And right now, what you should be hearing is that stupid smoke alarm chirping in the middle of the night saying, wake up, chirp, chirp. Something's wrong. Something's wrong here. Like, all these red flags should be coming up saying, wait a second, what? Yeah, I mean, Abraham and David, wow, that's awesome. And you get through all this and you're like, I don't know about your family tree. That's worse than a pine tree. This is weird. There's some scary stuff in there. So I want to just walk you through just 5 of the things that are brought to our attention. And Matthew is doing this on purpose. He's doing this on purpose because another thing that is typical of, it's not just like your genealogy is a resume in the ancient Near East. In the ancient Near East, when you gave a genealogy, you did not include women. This is a patriarchal society. And yet Matthew includes 5 women in this. Like, no, Matthew, you don't understand how this goes. We don't care about the women. He's like, no, you need to see the women and where they line up in this ancestry here. So let me walk you through. The first one that's introduced to us is Tamar. In verse 3, Judah fathered Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And who is Tamar? And Tamar married Judah's son. And so Judah is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And they ultimately become the 12 tribes of Israel, as we often refer to them. And so Judah is one of them. And so this is one of Jesus' great, however many grandpas. Judah. And he has a descendant with Tamar. But if you go back and you read the story in Genesis of how he has this descendant by Tamar, it's a jacked up story. Because what happens is Tamar is actually married to Judah's son. And Judah's son, married to her before they have any children, he dies. The son dies. And so in this culture, what is expected is that the next oldest brother who is not married would now become the bride or become the groom of this wife who is now a widow. And so this happens. The next oldest son takes his brother's place and now is married to Tamar. And he does not want to be, and he does not want children by her. And so every time they have intercourse, he does something to ensure that she does not get pregnant. And God does not like that. I mean, he is trying to buck the system. And so he dies, and she's still childless. And so what happens now is there's another young son, but he's too young. And so Judah tells her, stay and live as a widow until my younger son grows up, and then he can be your spouse. The kid grows up, and Judah's not giving her to him as a spouse. And so Tamar is living in shame and isolation. I mean, she's a woman, she's not married, and she's still young. Like, she has a life ahead of her. And so she is just alone, childless, and just at the mercy of this family of Judah. And Judah has made this promise that you're going to have my younger son when he grows up. He's not delivering on his promise. And so Judah goes to travel a little, and Tamar comes up with this idea. So she takes off, and she dresses herself essentially like a prostitute. Her face is covered, and she stands there knowing that Judah is about to come along the path. Judah comes along and is like, look, a prostitute. I think I'll have some fun. And so he employs her, and she's like, well, what are you going to pay me with? And he's like, I'll bring you a young goat. Right now I don't have it. And she's like, well, I need some collateral. Like, how do I know you're good on your word? And he's like, here's my signet ring, here's my cord, and here's my staff. You hold on to it, and when the young goat comes, then give it back as payment. And so they seal the deal there. They have their fun. And he leaves, goes home, and he says, okay, go get my stuff back, take the young goat as payment, otherwise we're going to be disgraced. And they go, and they're like, there is no temple prostitute here. And all the people, the locals are like, no, we don't have a prostitute around here. I don't know who you just did whatever with, but none of us. And so he's like, oh no, this isn't good. Like, this is going to become embarrassing. Someone has my signet ring, my cord, and my staff. And what in the world, Tamar? You're pregnant? What a shame. How disgusting. You should be killed. And she's like, well, I can tell you whose child it is. Whose child is it? It's the owner of this signet ring and this staff and this cord. And that's mine. And she is now impregnated by Judah. And she has this descendant. Like, what a disgusting, warped story. And he feels terrible. He's like, man, I'm so much worse than you. And so that's in Jesus' family tree. Here's Tamar. Hi, Grandpa. Weren't you awesome? You did a good thing, right? And then he goes on. Here's the next one, Rahab. So Rahab is in this genealogy of Jesus. And who is Rahab? Rahab lives in Jericho. And she doesn't just pretend to be a prostitute one day. She's actually kind of like the head lady of a brothel. Like, she lives in a whorehouse. This is a fortified kind of garrison city. And the Israelites, as Joshua is leading them into the promised land, they need to come conquer Jericho first. And so they send in some spies to see what's going on in the city. And Rahab is like the terror of you guys. Like, we know what God has done for you with these other kings outside of this land. We're terrified. We're scared of you. And so, spare us. Spare my family. And he's like, okay, we'll spare you. She hides them on a roof because soldiers are coming to find them and everything. And so they're like, you're going to place a scarlet rag outside your window and we'll spare you. And so we get this idea because she lets them down out of a window. So her house is apparently on this wall. And they march around that wall for days and they shout and everything. And God makes the walls fall. And yet there's this one house that remains. And they know because of that scarlet rag that is Rahab's house. We'll spare her. And so she becomes a part of Israel, of the Jews. Someone who ran a brothel, who was like a blatant career prostitute. That's Jesus' great, however many grandma? This is crazy. Rahab, and then the next one is Ruth. Ruth is a Moabite. Ruth is a Moabite, and the Moabites find their ancestry from when Lot had incest with his daughter. And it created this entire lineage of the Moabites. And so now she's living as a non-Jew. She's a Gentile. She's a Moabite. And they were engaged in all kinds of polytheistic cultural stuff. They were sacrificing kids. Like crazy things are happening in this culture. And yet she becomes a spouse to a Jew. And her mother-in-law, Naomi, is there. And her spouse dies. Naomi's a widow. And so they're just kind of on their own. She's like, I'm going to stick with you. And so they go back to Bethlehem. And there's this guy, Boaz, who's like, Naomi's like, listen, he's one of my descendants. He's a relative. So go glean in his field. In other words, like get some of what just falls from the harvest and everything. So she goes and she's getting enough food to provide for them. And Naomi's like, look, let's set a plan. Like maybe he could actually take you in. He could redeem all of us and bring us back into the family. And so there's this weird story that I've just got to be honest, like I have not landed on what this actually means. But in short, what happens is she comes into the room at night after Boaz has shown some grace and favor towards her. And she's in this room. He's asleep after they've had a little to drink and so forth. And she uncovers his feet and lies down there. And there are euphemisms galore that you can research. I don't really recommend it. But like, we don't know. Does that mean she actually like seduced him in this moment? Or was that just a way of like saying like, please? Like, make me your bride? But he accepts. Because now you have this non-Jew, this foreigner, who's already lost her spouse. And now she's brought into the family, and she comes from such a jacked up family. And that's in Jesus' family tree. And then the next one in verse 6, Jesse fathered King David, and David fathered Solomon by Uriah's wife. Do you know who Uriah's wife is? We don't even get her name here. But we know that Uriah's wife was Bathsheba. Bathsheba. And why does Matthew say David fathered Solomon by Uriah's wife as opposed to David fathered Solomon by Bathsheba? Because he wants to point you to the history of how did David and Uriah's wife come together? Because David, instead of being on the battlefield like the kings are supposed to be doing in the season of war, David stayed behind. And he's walking along the palace roof, and he looks out and like, oh, there's a hot chick taking a bath. I like her. Hey, bring her to me. And he has his way with her. And we don't get a ton of details, but you got to understand, like, when the king says, you're mine, you're his, this is essentially rape. She gets pregnant and comes and tells David, I'm pregnant. And so David's like, well, we got to cover this up. This is not good. This is scandalous. I'm a king. We can't have you having my, like, we'll bring her husband back and let him sleep with you, and she'll think that it's his. And so Uriah comes back from the battle. He's so honorable that he's like, my men don't get to sleep with their spouses. I'll sleep outside my house. And David's like, let's get him drunk. Like, come on, encourage. Like, you guys need to hook up. And he won't do it. So finally David is like, send him to the front lines where we know the battle is going to be heated. I want him killed. So now David is responsible for the death of Uriah and then brings in Bathsheba. And by that relationship has Solomon. This is Jesus' family tree. And then the last, Mary. Mary, the mother of Jesus, who gives birth to the Christ. And let's not forget her story, that she is a virgin. And so now you just imagine being a virgin, an angel shows up, you're told like you're going to be with child, it's Emmanuel, like you are going to birth the Christ. And okay, now you go tell your friend about that. Hey, I'm pregnant. Well, you and Joseph aren't married yet, this is weird. It's not Joseph's, I promise, I'm still a virgin. Right. Let's just imagine this scandal there. The shame as she walks around knowing that the Son of God is in my womb, and everyone around thinks that I am some kind of terrible girl. All 5 of these ladies included, Like they bring these stories of shame. How crazy. You just imagine, as you're reading this history, as you're looking at, okay, is this the Christ? Well, let's look at his resume. Let's look at his genealogy. Where does he come from? Look at all these people. Yeah, there's David and Abraham, but man, look at this. Look at this. Are you serious? Like the Messiah is to come? Is there any hope? So many failed generations. So many. And we think about our lives. And we know our own failures, even when trying. That we fail, and we fail, and we fail, and there's so many things that bring us shame and fear, and we're just terrified. Why? How could we ever move forward? And yet this is the hope that he gives us, that in such a family tree as this, the Christ would come. In these kinds of stories, there is hope. There is hope that has come. Pastor Scotty Smith said it like this. He said, but if the genealogy of Jesus comes as a stinging rebuke to human pride, it can also come to us as a gentle solace to whatever we have experienced at the hand of human devastation and dysfunction. The stories of Matthew's 5 women are the stories of widowhood, second and third marriages, incest, prostitution, lying, murder, adultery, economic hardship, foreign exclusion, and geographic dislocation. He reminds us that there is nothing that can separate us from God's love, and that there is nothing of life's bitterness that cannot be woven into God's providential redemptive history for me. My story is not over. There are more chapters to be written. That there is hope. Even when things seem so far beyond hope and redemption, there's a God who enters into the most horrendous of it all and says, I'm here and I am hope. The bottom line is this: hope has come, and his name is Jesus. Hope has come in this season as we march forward to Christmas, celebrating that Christ has come. You must see that hope came for us. Hope entered into our brokenness, into our mess, into our calamity, and said, there's light. I'm driving out darkness. There is hope where there was no hope. There's a future. And Jesus came to bring that. And if you don't believe that, Matthew ends the genealogy with this. In verse 17, he says, so all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations. And from David until the exile to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the exile to Babylon until the Christ, 14 generations. And I'm going to nerd out on you for just a moment, so follow me on this. Hebrew literature is beautiful. And Matthew, as a Hebrew, is writing and sync with how so much of Scripture is written. And so in Hebrew literature, these generational numbers are significant. And that's why he ends this genealogy saying, like, look, here's some highlights for you. All the generations from Abraham to David, 14. From David to exile to Babylon, 14. And from exile to Babylon until Christ, 14. Like, okay, if I was interested, I could have counted, thanks. Why does he draw our attention to that? Because sevens in Scripture are significant. The number 7 has significance and symbolism of completion and fulfillment and rest and Sabbath. Thus, on the 7th day in creation, God stops and he rests. It is good. And rest. And we've said this before, but like, let's forever be a church marked by this, that God created us on day 6, and then day 7, it's like, all right, you ready to get started? No, just rest. Just know that I'm sovereign. And I'm good, and celebrate that. Okay, now let's get to work. But just know that he is good, and he is fulfilling all things. And so 7 is significant. And so you get these 14 generations. 14 generations. And 14 generations, and if you look at that through the lens of 7, what he is saying there is Jesus is now the fulfillment. Jesus comes as the 7th 7. He is the ultimate Sabbath, the ultimate rest, the fulfillment and completion of everything. He is fully God. He is fully Savior. He is fully Messiah. He is fully King. He is fully the blessing to all nations. It is all complete in him. There is a hope that knows no end, and it has come in Jesus. It's all done. He has guaranteed it. He is here. And then for you theology nerds, just something fun. In the middle of that is David. David comes at this 14th mark. And so also, if you study this in detail, like you'll understand that in genealogies in the ancient Near East, they didn't include every single ancestor. They would make theological points with this. But as you see, David is here in the middle of this, at the 14th mark. And why is that? In Hebrew, there are 3 characters that make up the name David. And there's a numerical value to every character in the Hebrew alphabet. And so David's name in numerical qualities is 4, 6, and 4. Like, how brilliant. 4 plus 6 plus 4 is 14. And here he is as the 14th. And here is his descendant, Jesus, the greater David, the ultimate king, the ultimate hope, God's own son, who came in love for us to save us. So church, as we approach Christmas, and you look at how Matthew says, let's start here. Let's look at the history of Jesus' family. Let's look at the things that are supposed to define who he is. Do you see how jacked up that is? Well, that's where the Messiah came from. That is where hope came from, out of hopelessness. That is where life came from, out of a bunch of death. That hope has come. And so, church, do you need hope this season? As you look at your family, as you look at yourself and the impact that you may have on your family or your descendants, or does it end with you? Whatever it is, do you need hope this season? Do you have a personal or a family history that you feel trapped in? Like these 5 women, do you have stories full of disgrace? Do you have a life full of disgrace and trying to hide what is disgraceful in both ourselves and our families? And the hope of this season, the hope of Jesus, is that he has come. And why? Why did Matthew want to draw attention under the sovereignty and inspiration of the Spirit? So why did Jesus want his family tree to draw attention to all of this brokenness, to all of this disgrace? Because he came to give grace upon grace. He came to give grace upon grace. Jesus came to change it all, every bit of it. And that is our hope, beloved, that Jesus has come and he's entered in to save us, to rescue us from all disgrace, because he is grace upon grace. It's unending grace. He's forever king. And so let's find him and follow him forever in his kingdom. Will you pray with me? Jesus, we love you. We adore you. We exalt you, the name above every other name, even as you're tied to all these other names that would typically bring us down and take away hope and conjure up all these memories and feelings of regret and sorrow and despair and shame and guilt and everything else. And yet you have entered in to fulfill all of our longings. God, to give us hope forever. So Jesus, in this season, would you be big in our hearts and our minds and our lives? We want to make much of you. Let us be a loud voice. But God, let our lives also be loud, speaking volumes in the hope that we have because you are hope. God, you love us so much. And we love you. And we turn to you, the only hope, because all of our stories are full of brokenness and death and things that bring us shame, but you have delivered us from it all. So let us walk in your freedom, Jesus, because you never gave up. You never gave up, and you knew from before the foundation of the world this was your plan, that you would not give up on us, but you would take it upon yourself to give us life, to give us freedom, to give us hope, and you came. Jesus, we love you. We praise you because you've never given up, and we don't want to give up. We need you. We love you.